I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation that I just had with James Hazelwood or Jim Hazelwood. He's started a new series on YouTube called Everyday Spirituality. And so we talked a lot about that and about what he's doing in that series. We also have common interests in Carl Jung and Jungian psychology and how Jung's writing and psychology can connect with our spiritual lives and looking in terms of psycho-spiritual wholeness and transformation and what the connecting with our unconscious can do for us. And then we also talked about the church because Jim has recently retired from being a bishop in the Lutheran Church, the ELCA. And so we talk a lot about that, about his journey there, and about religions in the United States and in the world. We also talk some about dreams and even about Bob Dylan. So thanks for tuning in, and I know you're going to enjoy this. Welcome to The Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. Okay, welcome James Hazelwood to The Sacred Everywhere.
Yeah, it's good to be everywhere all at one time.
Everywhere all at once. Like that's what they say about God. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference is, wait, center, what is it? Center
Uh,
is everywhere and circumference is nowhere? Something like that.
it sounds good. We could look it up on a search engine.
We could. One probably shouldn't start a quote that one can't finish confidently when you're recording a video, right? Oh well, that's fine.
Yes,
Well, welcome. So glad to have you on.
good to
You,
be here.
yeah, you are an author and have been a bishop of the Lutheran Church, the ELCA, and you've recently launched a new series of videos on YouTube called Everyday Spirituality. And so I'd love to hear more about that. So first, maybe say a little bit about what led you to embark on that path.
Sure. Several years ago, I guess 2019, 2020, I wrote a book called Everyday Spirituality, which was basically grew out of my own personal struggles. I was never very good at spiritual practices and devotional books and, making sure I woke up at 5 a.m. and sat in lotus position for an hour. Um, but I found myself very engaged spiritually with the world, with life. So,
Mm.
the book is short little chapters on things like walking, sleeping, money, food, all of that kind of thing. And so I wrote the book and then did several other things. And that book has continued to do reasonably well. I'm kind of surprised it has a lot of legs. And this past year, I've gotten interested in video. Been a photographer for decades, but not much for video. And so I thought, I wonder, there's a lot of things about the book that I would do differently now, 6 years, 7 years later. And I thought, well, I didn't really want to rewrite the book, but I thought we could kind of do little chapters. And how could we do this through YouTube videos?
Wow.
And I basically was really intent on making sure that it was not just me talking. I wanted it. So I try to show. So if you go to the channel, you'll see me riding my bicycle around to different places and doing things. And so it's been fun. It's a challenge to learn a new medium, to try
Yeah.
to communicate. So.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. My dog has suddenly decided to start chasing the cat, so there may be some barking and commotion going on behind me. I hope not much. We'll keep going though.
Yeah, I couldn't
And
hear
and
anything. So
oh,
yeah.
good. And also, there's been a thunderstorm and probably some lightning, so I hope I don't disappear from this conversation. But if I do, just hang on. I'll be back.
All right.
So yeah. Well, I've watched a few of them, and they're just delightful. I mean, they're short little, like usually 5, 6 minutes, right?
Yep, yep, yeah. That's the window. Kind of the shortest is like 3.5. The longest I think is 7.5.
Okay. And you incorporate a lot of fun footage and music. How do you create it? Do you have do you have people helping you? Are you, how are you shooting these episodes?
Yeah, no, it's me, myself, and I. Um, and I use a combination of there's so many the technology is just amazing these days. I mean, I could the camera's not here. Well, here I can show you one. One of these cameras that I use is actually this big. So you
Whoa.
can see it in it's like in the palm of my hand. Insta360 and GoPro and all of these companies have made these things smaller, and the quality is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a combination of me filming myself, tripods, and things like that. So you see me going in and out of places. I learned from watching a number of different folks that made kind of the daily vlog, which was big about 10 years ago, and how they made them. There's a guy in New York City called, his name is Casey Neistat. He's kind of the premier person who did this. And I just watched their videos and
Mm.
figured out, kind of reversed engineered, okay, he must be doing this and that and so forth and so on. I really wanted these videos to be something that people would want to watch.
Uh-huh.
And I really wanted them to be the kind of thing that possibly younger people, or maybe more specifically, people that don't have a place that they call their faith home or spiritual center. They're not going to yoga studios or churches or synagogues or temples, but they might, this might be a starting point for
Yeah.
them. So it's kind of an introductory we live in a video world now. So
Yeah, we do. And like I love how you, like in one episode that you were talking about breathing and breath, and you spilled out tiles from Scrabble or something and spelled out words like pneuma and ruach with the letters. And and then you also, in another episode talking about money, you actually went to a river. We're talking about currency and current and flow. And so where do these
yeah.
creative ideas come from? I mean, obviously you said you wrote the book previous and maybe they were all in that, but what sparks your imagination in terms of visual presentation?
Yeah, I always, so usually there's the topic. I start with a topic, and I tend to first work with what's the essay going to be, because they're paired with on Substack. I write an essay. So
Uh-huh.
money, it was a recent one that I did, and so there's kind of I do the thinking and the writing first for that,
Mm.
and then I say, okay, how can I translate that into a different medium? Because and you can't, it just doesn't work to just like read a script and look into a camera. I mean, what would be the point of that?
Uh-huh.
So I just start to ask myself, okay, so the money, the currency idea, well, currents, and I was thinking, well, electrical currents. Well, I don't want to really be messing around with electricity very much. That didn't sound very appealing, and also like, how would I film that?
Right.
But so anyway, whaling's on the way, and kind of currency and currents. And where I live here in southern Rhode Island, we have lots of little streams and ponds and so forth and so on.
Mm.
So I started kind of playing with that in my mind. Um,
Yeah.
and lots of takes, like, okay, take one, take two. But, I stumbled over those words. So, so
Yeah.
you're trying to pull from the best.
Right, right, right. Um, I loved, in fact, in that episode on breath too, you had at one point you had a white coat on like you were the doctor. I love that you had a name tag that said Marcus Welby. I'm dating myself here, and maybe you too, but I love that.
You caught that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I try to put in stuff like that, just, for those people like you and I that, can
Yeah.
remember who is this and what is this. So I do try to have a comical aspect to it as well.
Yeah.
So it's playful, it's entertaining, and still gets the point across.
Yeah.
That lab coat, yeah, you can get a lab coat on Amazon for about $25. And
Okay. So you may be appearing in future videos in other scientific guises.
Yes, I'm acquiring slowly a wardrobe.
Yeah. Spread out that cost per episode a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Exactly.
great. So, people might say or might think that, gosh, I don't necessarily think about, we hear so much lately the term spiritual but not religious, which acts as if there's this clear divide and wall between the two. And so people might think, well, this guy was a big guy in the church, probably grew up in the church. Why is he talking about spirituality? And so I'd love to hear maybe even a little bit to back up a little bit more about your journey of your own religious tradition, your own faith journey, and then maybe how, you, because spirituality has not typically been stressed in the Lutheran Church, in my
Right.
experience,
No,
in the
that's very
past.
true. Yeah, Lutherans. So if people talk about I'm spiritual but not religious, Lutherans would be I'm religious but not spiritual.
Right.
Um, and that's actually true, I think, of a lot of American Christianity.
Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with other branches, other faiths, but in America, it- I always found when I was a parish pastor, like people would come in expecting, oh, this must be a place where I can explore spirituality. And like they'd try to strike up conversations with people in the congregation. The people in the congregation would be like, go talk to the pastor. I don't know. I did not grow up in the church. I had wonderful parents and that were very loving and supportive, but going to church was just not a part of their lives, and so it wasn't a part of mine. And there's a long story that goes back to my grandmother and her experience
Hmm.
in like the early 20th century, just having this horrendous experience. Nothing violent or traumatizing happened to her, but just basically she just had a real different view
Hmm.
of God and faith. So she vowed never to raise her kids, which would have been my mother. And so my whole family is not part of the church. But in my 20s, I ended up going to a small Lutheran college only because they had a basketball team. And I'm
Ah.
very tall. And so I tried out for the basketball team. Anyway, long story short, ended up working one summer at a Lutheran camp. A pastor took a chance on me. And I've always had a lot of interest in what we call spirituality. And I didn't know about religion. I didn't have any, I mean, my view of clergy was like Father Mulcahy from MASH. I mean, it's
Right.
just, kind of bumbling, kind of good-natured people. Um, but I worked at this camp, and the director was himself was a Lutheran pastor. He was like my height, and he'd been a linebacker at Iowa State, and he was a Vietnam draft dodge resistor, and he was just a different kind of person, and with a
Hmm.
big personality, and so I just was like open to a whole new world and had lots of questions. And so somebody said, well, you should go to seminary because that's where you get those answered.
Ah.
And which, so I did. I mean, I
Yeah.
was like, what am I going to do? My father wanted me to get a job at a marketing firm. Well, that doesn't sound like fun. So I went to seminary and had a great experience in Berkeley, California.
Hmm.
One of my favorite classes was the history of Christian spirituality, which was taught at
Nice.
I think the Jesuit school, and
Ah.
uh, did a project on the poet, Nicaraguan poet Ernesto Cardenal. And
Hmm.
anyway, I didn't grow up in the church, but I ended up in the church.
Yeah.
So I kind of bring a different perspective. A lot of people would say I'm not as reverent, and for good or for ill. And so, yeah, so I could just go on about that, but that gives you kind of the short version.
Yeah. So you were by no means a cradle Lutheran.
No, not at
Yeah.
all. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
baptized when I was in my 20s in a Chumash Indian grinding stone in the Los Padres National Forest. Is
Wow.
where, yeah, yeah,
That's pretty amazing in and of itself.
yeah. It was again the same pastor Paul Fauski and somebody else, another pastor named Paul Evenson, was part of the camp curriculum, was teaching about Native American culture, and I think it might have been their idea. Well, why don't we go out to one of those grinding stones, which was where women in the Chumash culture would have been grinding pinyon pine nuts
Hmm.
for meals for staple for bread, and so they're nicely shaped like a bowl and
Yeah.
filled it with water, and yeah, so it's not full immersion.
Right. Right. You were just sprinkled rather than pushed under.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking myself about my own experience. I did grow up in the Lutheran Church, and it was when I was in a church in Marietta, Georgia, in the Atlanta area, that was a wonderful church that I was part of for 25 years. And was invited to do a weekend retreat that was originally called Curcio and then became Via de Cristo. You're probably familiar with it. And it was on that retreat, the very first night we got to this camp where we were all staying, they asked us to remain in silence until after breakfast, I think the next day. And I had never done that before, and it was such a foreign experience. And this retreat was a beautiful experience. It was very uplifting, very loving. And after that, I then went on my first full silent weekend retreat at an Ignatian retreat center in the Atlanta area. And since then I've done a few of those. And meanwhile, I was also reading the mystics and stuff like that. So that was, but again, more from the Catholic tradition, obviously. And so that was my first introduction to that kind of spirituality, that kind of intentional spirituality, and it was just a fascinating thing for me. And so of course there's that, more developed, or the kind of spirituality that you referenced in the beginning in terms of practices and disciplines, and whether it be fasting or prayer or silence, whatever it is. But in this adventure you're on now, you're really lifting up these everyday things and exploring how they might be part of one's spiritual path. What are you hoping that'll do for people?
Well, I guess one is that it will remove the stigma, the shame, or the guilt around like I should be
Mm,
more spiritual. I should be doing these kinds of things because then that would make me spiritual. That kind of thinking that some people don't, but I find that there's a fair number of people in the church and especially clergy kind of think that way a little bit. They kind
mm,
of feel like, well, I'm not getting up at 5 a.m. or whatever it may be. They may themselves go on retreats, but then like a lot of us, I went to Oaxaca last October for 10 days of Spanish language immersion, and I had all kinds of great intentions of coming back and having flashcards, and you just kind of you lose that. So I guess the
yeah.
first thing is to kind of remove that burden that people might carry with it. The second is equally important from my point of view, and that is to see the world, to see all of God's creation as imbued with the divine.
Mm,
That the holy is something that is not something that is separate, that happens over there, only in a synagogue or only in a temple or only in a religious space, but it's a part of daily life. And so, because I think that's pretty important, are kind of, inheriting it from the Greeks and Cartesian models of, everything's divided, the sacred and the secular, as if
hmm.
they're two different camps. And so that's the other piece. It's kind of a contemporary way of saying this is all amazing.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. I love that. If you're enjoying this conversation, I'd invite you to download my free guide, Awakening to the Sacred: 5 Keys to Experiencing the Divine. I hope to, in this guide, help you to unlock a more joyful, creative, and spirit-filled life, especially if you're hungry for a spiritual life that feels real. So check out the show notes and click on the link below to access that free guide. Thanks. Um, so for you, what kinds of spaces or what kinds of encounters have opened up what we might just say awe and wonder, or a sense of the sacred for you?
The first thing that comes to mind, which I think is true for a lot of people, is experiences in nature.
Mhm.
I think nature is the first religion, and that's not a worship of nature, just to be clear. But it encounters or experiences that often happen for me on hikes, in beautiful locations. Um, I can remember very early on, one of my earliest quasi-mystical experiences was swimming in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, and floating on my back and looking up and seeing the moon. This is in the middle of the day, and it was the roundness of the moon, the floating on the water, that whole kind of realizing that I'm on a globe, was just kind of this brief moment of aha.
Mm.
And so I think that nature is oftentimes where a lot of people experience God.
Yeah, I think that's true, very true. And it's sad when you think about how many people don't have a lot of access to nature in the sense of kind of bigger spaces of nature. They might have access to a house plant, or they might see a tree growing on their, urban streetscape, or have a pet, but
Hmm.
they're maybe not as often having that opportunity to encounter, fields and wildlife beyond the squirrels or the pigeons.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is actually one of the reasons that parks were developed, and I think this is something that in the United States we inherited from Europe, is parks were initially there and put there because there was this intuitive sense that people needed nature.
Mm,
Now, maybe this comes from a time period where they weren't thinking about this. I don't think they were thinking about this in religious terms, and I don't think they were thinking about it in terms of scientific terms. But we now know that, there's a reason. If Manhattan did not have Central Park, that place would be a lot more crazy than it already is.
right.
That people really need to have that space to go in, and it's just literally the act of walking and seeing green and dirt and rocks and trees and all of that,
Yeah.
has this kind of experience. But yeah, if you live in an urban environment and you're in an apartment, your exposure to nature is going to be pretty limited. And maybe
Yeah.
that is why we try to grow house plants.
Yeah. Could be. Could be. So, you and I have a connection through and a common interest in Carl Jung and his work and Jungian psychology, connections with the Hayden Institute. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts about why Jung is important still today.
Jung is important today because he was, for me, and his writings were the first to give language and permission to say this thing we call God, the sacred, the holy, the universe, whatever language we want to use, is alive and real.
Mm,
And he used language that makes it more acceptable for less religious people. Um, and so that's the main reason. I first encountered Carl Jung when I was in college. Had a English professor, and we read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections for a class called The Literature and Psychology of Mysticism.
mm,
And I
wow.
don't remember anything else that we read in that class. I have no idea what we read.
Yeah.
But I remember that book, and I remember, and have since read it or listened to the audiobook version of it many times over the years. And it still is very powerful because I think also Jung was struggling with something that I've always struggled with, which is Jung looked at his father and saw this kind of calcified Christianity that was rooted in doctrine and yet disconnected from his father's own personal life. And Jung
Mm,
saw that, and my interpretation is that he saw that and went, that's not helpful for
yeah.
me. Um, and I have that similar experience, not with any one individual, but with kind of watching the church from both the inside and the outside as
Yeah.
kind of like it's kind of, missing this life energy that is really it's the origins of how it all started,
Right.
but we've kind of drifted away from it over a long time.
Yeah. And so how does his work contribute to our spirituality? Because he was obviously writing as a, scientist, psychiatrist, psychologist, working with clients, not wanting to get beyond kind of the empirical world so that he would be taken seriously, yet also having so much in his work that, he was often accused of, oh, and dismissed as a mystic. And he was reading mystics and he was looking into astrology and Hinduism and Buddhism and other things. What do you think he contributes to our spirituality?
Um, well, I guess it's that language again about maybe the intersection of psychology and spirituality.
Hmm.
That's the part of Jung that has kind of always interested me. Um, I, it's hard for me to put a kind of a real pin in this.
Yeah.
Um, but I'll just use one piece of his work that has been important, and that is both he and Freud and others emphasize dreams.
Hmm.
But Jung looked at dreams as avenues for connecting to what he called the collective unconscious. And I've always taken that as dreams are a window into the spiritual realm.
Hmm.
And so I kind of have, in my own kind of psychology and spirituality, almost equated the collective unconscious with the divine, with God.
Hmm.
Um, and by that, I don't mean like a supreme being kind of God, Sistine Chapel,
Yeah.
with a father figure, but more the kind of the source of all life. So I think the dream piece is a specific part for me because I think dreams that's a form of spirituality.
Yeah.
And you don't need to go to anybody to, just take a journal and write down your dreams. And people say, I don't remember my dreams. Well, if you start thinking about it or paying attention or put a little book next to your bed, they'll come. And I'm not sure that dreams necessarily need to be interpreted. I think they just need to be lived.
Mm.
I think that was Hillman's ideas a little bit
Hmm.
more.
Hmm.
I know he's a somewhat controversial figure in Jungian psychology, but every movement's got to have their heretics. It's what makes movements healthy.
Exactly.
And Hillman didn't want to like say, well, you dreamt about a chicken and that means this.
Right.
He at least what little I've read and listened to him, he wanted to kind of like, let's just live with this. And so I think that's the piece for me
Hmm.
personally, that Jung opens up in terms of the spirituality.
Yeah. I want to say get into a little bit more when you talk about the collective unconscious, and there certainly was in Jung's writing this sense in which he spoke about the collective unconscious as that source of dynamism and creativity and vitality for every person, and that it had our best interests in mind in terms of leading us toward what he called individuation, or that integration of the opposites within us and that bringing together of all parts of the personality. And dreams certainly are one avenue through which symbols from that unconscious arise. Where else have you seen people or yourself, finding connection with that unconscious and its
Well, I think
wisdom?
the arts is probably, the a place that I see it the most in terms of painters, poets, novels, literature. I think that the arts community is maybe I don't know if they're more open to it, but I guess I will say, yeah, I think there's an openness to that unconscious flow happening through them and expressing. I think about, about a year and a half, the Bob Dylan biopic came out,
Mm,
a Complete Unknown,
yeah.
and so I've kind of followed Dylan for a long time since I first discovered him in probably the early 70s. But there's a couple scenes in that movie where Dylan like comes bursting into an apartment and he just is looking for a guitar, picks it up and just starts strumming out and articulating the words. And I remember reading interviews with him, and maybe it's in his book Chronicles, where he was asked later, why can't you write songs like that now? And he
Mm,
says, I can't write songs like that now. But back then, this is like early mid 60s, like things were just flowing through me.
yeah.
And I was just trying to write them down as fast as they came to me. And
Mm,
I don't know if Bob Dylan would say it's the collective unconscious, and there might be people going, "Oh, that's not what happened." But I think that's an idea. That's the idea that I think happens in the art world.
yeah.
So music I would also put in that category as well as
Sure.
painters and sculptors and things like that. So
Yeah.
I'm not a very good museum goer. You don't want to go to the museum with me because I look like I'm trying to get my steps in for the week because I do not sit and I cannot stand walking at that pace and just standing in front of a painting until something grabs me. So what I
Mm,
often do is I go to a museum and I just walk and I look and I'm walking and looking, walking, looking. I don't really want to be talking with anybody, which is why usually I go to museums by myself.
uh-huh.
Um, and until all of a sudden something will like it just reaches and grabs me, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or whatever, and then I'll sit and I'll
Mm,
just be with that painting for however long, and then I'm done. Then I
yeah.
leave. Like I don't
Wow.
need to see anything else, and I'm just looking for whatever that one thing is that grabs me. I don't know if this is kind of a poor man's act of imagination in a museum or something like that.
I love it. I love it. That reminds me of a time when I was almost late for a plane because when I was living in Chicago, took a bus to Midway Airport and walked through a section of the airport that I didn't normally go through because I didn't normally take the bus there. And it was filled at that time with images from the Hubble telescope. And
Uh,
those are always so arresting for me. And I just was like, oh, wide open mouth, gaping at these incredible images.
nice.
And then when I got back, they were there, I think, because there was also an IMAX movie at the Museum of Science and Industry on the repair of the Hubble telescope that had been done and improvements made. And so, of course, I immediately went to that movie when I got back, and it was glorious to just be in that, especially in IMAX, and be kind of immersed in
Yes.
in that imagery.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the arts can really evoke, I think that's the purpose of symbol is to evoke something in us that is maybe unknown to us or bring something forward that's a new way of looking at something, a new way of understanding.
Yeah. And I think the person that made this very concrete for me was it Hayden is Sheila.
Mm.
The last name is
Petrocelli?
Petrocelli. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's, she lives in Georgia, but she's such a Jersey girl. It's just great. But yeah, so on one of our retreats, and she just basically it was a way of opening up for me, a non-artist, like kind of a let it flow experience. And I have
Mm.
there's a couple of things that are over there on my corner that are left from that experience where we took children's coloring books, the cardboard kind, ripped the little thin cover off,
Hmm.
and then we painted them, and I made a book of dreams and so forth. It was just like it was so great. It was just
Nice.
and she's big on like we over rationalize this
Yeah.
too much. It's just you're only going to get an intellectual understanding. You need something that moves you to another level, a deeper level.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
in fact, I was just rewatching from years ago the TED Talk with Jill Bolte Taylor about her book My Stroke of Insight and the stroke that she had. And she you don't oh, you're not familiar with this? Oh
No,
my gosh.
I'm not.
She's a uh neuroanatomist that was at Harvard Medical School. And in the late 1990s, she had a stroke that completely took offline her left brain, basically. And so she
Wow.
found herself all of a sudden in this like mystical land of complete peace and utter bliss and connected to everything. Like it quieted that rational
Huh.
part of the brain that's driving our experience to that kind of one way of looking at the world and opened her up to this whole other experience. It's a beautiful, beautiful talk. I think it came out in like 2008. Um,
Hmm.
and then after that, I watched, she was like about a year old interview with her on the Mayim Bialik breakdown podcast on YouTube. Mayim Bialik, was in The Big Bang Theory and an actor and
Okay.
then and became a neuroscientist and has a PhD. And it's quite a story, but it was a great episode. And
Huh.
she has a newer book called Whole Brain Living, where she's talking about these other sides of our brains. And anyway, it's just, I think that immersion in the arts, if we can allow that more rational side of us to be a little quieter and just get in the flow of image and sound or color or whatever it is, it can open up so much for us.
Hmm. Well, and this is one of the things Ian McGilchrist has talked about in his
Yeah.
two-volume tome, which I have sitting over there.
Yeah.
But he said once he was going to release the very last chapter of that second volume as just a single like monograph. I don't know if it's come out or not because it's on spirituality and his whole
Yeah.
thing, his thinking about the two sides of the brain and how this is impacting our culture because we're losing contact with that more intuitive side, and the hyper rationalization and what we're losing because we need both. We need the interaction
Yeah.
of both. But so that, as you're talking about that, it reminds me of his work, which is like, oh, man, you got to be a very smart person to understand what that guy's talking about. I usually
Yeah.
listen to like 5 sentences and go, okay, I'm just gonna like meditate on those for a
Yeah,
while.
it's not like you can read it real fast.
Yeah, I bought those and it's like, okay.
Yeah. I have
But
it. I have The Master and His Emissary by him. I have not yet read it, and I've seen a lot of interviews with him, so
yeah,
I'm aware of what he's saying, but I have not yet read the text. So I want to do
yeah.
that because
I
it's
did listen to The
quite
Master and
interesting.
Emissary on audiobook.
Ah,
And
okay.
that like on long drives,
Yeah,
that's a way of doing it. But I don't think matter of things or whatever it's called. The Matter with Things, which
yeah.
is
May not be
so
available on audio yet. Maybe.
that would be a lot to read.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like two-volume dictionary encyclopedia kind of thing.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Well, let's pause here and then we'll come back for the second half and we'll jump into some other topics about religious traditions and diversity of religions and if there's still a role for the church in the world, maybe a little bit of that. So let's just pause here. Thanks for listening to the first half of this episode. If you'd like to go deeper, click on the link in the show notes to access the full episode for paid subscribers of The Sacred Everywhere on Substack. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this episode far and wide. I'd love your help to grow this channel. Until next time, may you notice the sacred everywhere.